Is that when you filed the complaint with the medical board? Yes. And that's when things got really interesting. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. The medical board investigator contacted me 3 months ago. Turns out, my complaint wasn't the first one they'd received about your uncle. Dr. Henley mentioned there were others. 3 others, actually. 2 residents and another nurse. But Elena, here's what your Dr. Henley might not know. The medical board investigation has been stalled for months because they haven't been able to establish a pattern of escalating behavior. What do you mean? All of the previous complaints involved harassment, inappropriate comments, abuse of authority, serious violations, but not criminal behavior. Your assault, documented by an independent physician with clear evidence of intentional violence, that changes everything. She opened her folder and showed me a letter from the state medical board. This came last week. The board is requesting additional information about Dr. Vasquez's recent activities and asking if I'm aware of any incidents involving physical violence or patient harm. I stared at the letter. They're looking for exactly what happened to me. Elena, your complaint won't just be additional evidence. It will be the centerpiece that ties everything together. The medical board has been building a case against your uncle for months, but they needed proof that his behavior was escalating to physical violence. So if you file the complaint with Dr. Henley's medical documentation and my records of his pattern of harassment, we can destroy him. The word destroy hung in the air between us. That's what this was really about. Not just stopping Uncle Raymond's abuse, but ending his career, his reputation, his ability to hurt anyone else. Jen, I have to ask, are you sure you want to do this? You've already been through so much. She smiled, but there was no humor in it. Elena, for the past year, I've watched your uncle continue to work, continue to have access to vulnerable patients and staff, continue to use his position to intimidate and abuse people. Every day I don't act is another day he has the opportunity to hurt someone else. She closed her folder and looked at me directly. The question isn't whether I'm ready to do this. The question is whether you are. Because once we file your complaint, there's no going back. Your uncle will know you're the one who brought him down, and he will never forgive you for it. I thought about my family, waiting at home for me to accept Uncle Raymond's generous offer and make this whole problem disappear. I thought about the medical school acceptance, the guaranteed residency, the financial security. Then I thought about 16-year-old me, frozen in Uncle Raymond's office while his hands moved where they shouldn't. I thought about the residents who had been too afraid to proceed with their complaints. I thought about Jennifer Walsh, forced out of her job for trying to tell the truth. I'm ready, I said. Jennifer smiled, and this time it was genuine. Then let's bring him down. I filed the formal complaint with the state medical board on a Tuesday morning at exactly 9 a.m., standing in the marble lobby of the Westfield Government Complex with Jennifer Walsh beside me and Dr. Henley on speakerphone as a witness. The complaint was 12 pages long, meticulously documented, and supported by medical records, witness statements, and Jennifer's extensive files on Uncle Raymond's pattern of harassment. The medical board investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Carol Martinez, accepted our documentation with the kind of professional gravity that told me this wasn't just another routine complaint. She explained that Dr. Vasquez would be notified within 48 hours, that he would have the right to respond, and that the investigation would likely take several months to complete. Ms. Vasquez, she said, looking directly at me, I want you to understand that filing this complaint may result in significant personal and professional retaliation. Dr. Vasquez will know that you initiated this action, and he will likely use every resource at his disposal to discredit your testimony. I understand, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Good, because in my experience, men in Dr. Vasquez's position don't go down quietly. She was right. Uncle Raymond's response came faster than anyone expected. I was at home Wednesday evening helping my mother prepare dinner when my father's phone rang. He answered it in the living room, but his voice carried clearly to the kitchen. Raymond? What do you mean investigated? What complaint? My mother's hand stilled on the vegetables she was chopping. I continued stirring the sauce, my heart pounding, but my expression carefully neutral. Are you sure? Who would... Elena? Elena filed a complaint against you? That's when my mother dropped the knife. Within minutes, my father was in the kitchen, his face flush with anger and panic. Elena, what the hell have you done? I turned off the stove and faced him calmly. I filed a complaint with the state medical board about Uncle Raymond's assault on me. Assault? My mother gasped. Elena, he lost his temper. That's not... He fractured my skull, Mom. He gave me a traumatic brain injury. That's assault. My father moved closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do you have any idea what you've done? Raymond called the house in a panic. The medical board contacted him today. They're launching a formal investigation. Good, I said simply. The word hung in the air like a bomb. Good? My father repeated, his voice incredulous. Elena, this will destroy everything. Raymond's career, our family's reputation, your future. He said the medical school offer is off the table now, completely off the table. I nodded. I figured it would be.
My mother started crying. Elena, please. There has to be a way to fix this. Can't you call them back? Tell them you made a mistake? I didn't make a mistake, Mom. That's when Carlos appeared in the doorway, having clearly heard the commotion from upstairs. Elena, are you out of your fucking mind? Uncle Raymond just called me. He's talking about lawsuits, about having you declared mentally incompetent due to your head injury. He thinks you're having some kind of psychotic break. I almost laughed at the predictability of it. Of course, Uncle Raymond would try to use my brain injury against me to suggest that trauma had made me delusional or unreliable. Carlos, I said calmly, Uncle Raymond is under investigation by the state medical board, has been for 8 months. There are multiple complaints against him for harassment and abuse. My complaint isn't coming out of nowhere. It's additional evidence in an ongoing case. He didn't even apologize after the blow sent me crashing into the marble countertop, after the blood pooled beneath my head on the cold kitchen floor, after the paramedics rushed me to Riverside General with a skull fracture and traumatic brain injury that would change my life forever. I woke up 3 days later to find my family gathered around my hospital bed, not with tears of concern, but with carefully rehearsed explanations about how I fell down the stairs and how we needed to keep this private to protect Uncle Raymond's reputation as the most respected pediatric surgeon in Millbrook County. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Vasquez, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever been told to stay quiet about your own assault to keep the family peace? The neurologist, Dr. Patricia Henley, stood at the foot of my bed with her clipboard, her sharp green eyes scanning between my family and the inconsistent story they kept telling. She asked me directly, while my mother, Teresa, gripped my hand like a warning, "Elena, can you tell me exactly what happened before you lost consciousness?" I opened my mouth to speak the truth, but my mother's fingers tightened around mine like a vice. My father, Diego, cleared his throat loudly. My brother Carlos shifted uncomfortably in the corner, and Uncle Raymond, the man who had grabbed me by my hair and slammed my head into the granite surface during our family discussion about my college choices, stood there in his expensive suit, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from 30 years of never facing consequences. She fell, my mother said quickly, her voice trembling with the effort of the lie. She was rushing down the stairs in those heels. You know how clumsy she can be. Dr. Henley's pen stopped moving. She looked at me again, and I saw something in her expression that I couldn't quite place at the time. Later,
I would learn it was recognition, the look of someone who had seen this particular dance before. The injury pattern, Dr. Henley said slowly, is more consistent with blunt force trauma than a fall. The injury occurred at the occipital bone, which typically happens when the back of the head strikes a flat, hard surface with significant force. Uncle Raymond stepped forward, his voice carrying that authoritative tone that had commanded operating rooms for decades. "Doctor, I'm Raymond Vasquez, Chief of Pediatric Surgery at Metropolitan Children's Hospital. I understand you're being thorough, but sometimes a fall can create unexpected injury patterns. My niece has always been dramatic about her accidents." The way he said dramatic made my stomach clench. It was the same dismissive tone he'd used my entire life, the same way he'd brushed off every time I tried to tell my parents about his inappropriate comments, his accidental touches, and his increasingly aggressive behavior whenever we were alone. But Dr. Henley didn't flinch. If anything, her expression hardened. "Dr. Vasquez," she said, and there was steel in her voice that I'd never heard anyone use with my uncle before. "I've been treating traumatic brain injuries for 15 years. I can distinguish between fall-related trauma and assault-related trauma. The evidence doesn't support your family's account." The room went dead silent. My mother's grip on my hand became painful. My father's face turned red. Carlos looked like he wanted to disappear into the wall. And Uncle Raymond, carefully controlled mask, slipped just enough for me to see the flash of rage underneath. "Are you suggesting," Uncle Raymond said, his voice dangerously quiet, "that someone in this family deliberately harmed Elena?" "I'm documenting what the medical evidence shows," Dr. Henley replied calmly. "And right now, that evidence indicates intentional trauma, not an accidental fall." That's when my mother broke. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "please don't write that. He's the most respected doctor in this county. If there are allegations, if there are rumors, it could destroy everything. Our family, his practice, Elena's future. She's applying to medical school, and if Raymond's reputation is damaged..." She didn't finish the sentence, but the threat was clear. My uncle held my future in his hands. His letters of recommendation, his connections, his influence, they were supposed to be my pathway to becoming a doctor myself. And they were willing to let me absorb brain damage in silence to protect that pathway. I tried to speak, to tell Dr. Henley the truth, but my mother leaned closer to my bed. "Elena, sweetheart, you know how much stress you've been under with college applications. You've been having those dizzy spells, remember? Sometimes when we're overwhelmed, we can get confused about what really happened." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost believed her. Maybe I was confused. Maybe the trauma had affected my memory. Maybe I really had just fallen. But then Uncle Raymond moved closer to my bed, and I smelled his cologne, the same expensive scent that had been in my face when he grabbed my hair and hissed, "You ungrateful little bitch. You think you can disrespect me in my own brother's house?" before slamming my head into the counter with enough force to crack my skull. The memory came flooding back with perfect, horrifying clarity. I had been in the kitchen at my parents' house in Riverside Heights, preparing for our traditional Sunday family dinner. Uncle Raymond had arrived early, as he often did, and found me alone. He'd started his usual lecture about how I needed to be more grateful for all the opportunities he was providing me, how I should be more appreciative of his mentorship. Dr. Henley wrote it all down, every detail, every quote, every bruise and laceration that corroborated my account. "Elena," she said when I finished, "I want you to know that this documentation will be permanent. It will be part of your medical record forever. If you ever need it for legal proceedings, for police reports, for anything, it will be there." At the time, I didn't understand how prophetic those words would be. I didn't know that Uncle Raymond's assault on me wasn't an isolated incident. I didn't know about the medical malpractice lawsuits that had been quietly settled over the years, or the nursing staff who had complained about his behavior, or the young residents who had been too afraid to speak up about his mentoring techniques. I didn't know that Dr. Henley's meticulous documentation would become the foundation for bringing down a man who had hurt far more people than just me. But I was about to find out. When my family was allowed back in the room, the atmosphere had changed completely. Dr. Henley was professional but cold. Her notes were complete and sealed. The truth was now part of the official record, and there was nothing they could do to change it. Uncle Raymond tried one more time. "Doctor, I hope you understand that family disputes can be complicated. Sometimes people say things in emotional moments that they don't really mean." Dr. Henley looked at him with the kind of professional disdain usually reserved for medical incompetence. "Dr. Vasquez, your niece has suffered a traumatic brain injury. My job is to document the cause of that injury accurately. I have done so." She handed me a business card. "Elena, I want you to keep this. If you have any questions about your medical records, or if you need copies for any reason, call me directly." My mother tried to intercept the card, but I held it tight. That night, alone in my hospital room, I stared at Dr. Henley's business card and realized something that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. For the first time in my life, I had proof. I had documentation. I had someone who had witnessed my family's attempts to cover up Uncle Raymond's violence and who had refused to participate in that cover-up. I had power. I just didn't know yet how much power I actually had, or how far I was willing to use it. But I was about to find out, because 3 days later, Dr. Henley would call me with information that would change everything. Information about other victims, information about patterns of behavior, information about a medical board investigation that had been waiting for exactly the kind of documentation she had just created. Information that would let me destroy the man who tried to destroy me. And this time, my family's demands for peace weren't going to protect him. The girl who had always stayed quiet to keep the family together was about to learn that sometimes the only way to heal is to tear everything apart and rebuild it from the ground up. The game was about to change completely, and Uncle Raymond had no idea what was coming. The recovery period at home was when I truly understood how deep the rot went in my family. While I nursed my fractured skull and tried to manage the constant headaches that Dr. Henley warned would persist for months, my family launched a systematic campaign to rewrite history and gaslight me into submission. "Elena, you know Uncle Raymond would never hurt you intentionally. He's been like a father to you since you were little. Remember how he taught you to ride a bike? How he helped you with your science projects?" But what she conveniently forgot to mention were the other memories. The way Uncle Raymond's hands would linger too long when he helped me with those science projects. How his bike riding lessons always involved him holding onto my waist in ways that made me uncomfortable, even at age 8. How his visits to our house in Riverside Heights always coincided with times when my father, Diego, would be working late at the construction site. My brother, Carlos, was even worse. 2 days after I came home from the hospital, he cornered me in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Uncle Raymond had fractured my skull. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he hissed, keeping his voice low so our parents wouldn't hear. "Do you know what this could do to our family's reputation?" I stared at him, my head still wrapped in bandages, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Carlos, he assaulted me. He gave me a traumatic brain injury, and you're worried about reputation? He lost his temper. Yeah, it was wrong, but you provoked him. You know how he gets when people are ungrateful. You should have just accepted his help and kept your mouth shut." That word, ungrateful, hit me like a physical blow. It was the same word Uncle Raymond had spat at me before he grabbed my hair. The same word my family had been using to control me my entire life. See, the thing about Uncle Raymond wasn't just that he was successful, he was the family's success story. The one who had elevated all of us from our working class roots in East Millbrook to respectability. When my parents bought their house in Riverside Heights, Uncle Raymond co-signed the mortgage. When Carlos needed money for his business degree at Westfield College, Uncle Raymond paid the tuition. When I needed a car to get to my job at Riverside General's volunteer program, Uncle Raymond bought it. Every major milestone in our family's upward mobility had Uncle Raymond's fingerprints on it, and he never let us forget that.
I didn't claw my way out of East Millbrook to watch my family throw away everything I've built, he would say during his regular lectures about gratitude and respect. You kids have no idea what real struggle looks like. Everything you have, everything you are, you owe to the sacrifices I made. The sacrifices he made. Never mind that my father worked 16-hour days in construction to pay the bills Uncle Raymond's co-signature made possible. Never mind that my mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in Westfield to afford the extras that Uncle Raymond deemed necessary for our social advancement. Never mind that Carlos and I had worked part-time jobs since we were 15 to contribute to household expenses. No, according to Uncle Raymond, we were all just ungrateful beneficiaries of his generosity. And the sick part was, for most of my life, I believed him. I believed him when he told me that my early admission to Westfield College's pre-med program was only possible because of his reputation in the medical community. I believed him when he said that my volunteer work at the hospital was meaningless without his connections to turn it into something substantial. I believed him when he convinced me that my future as a doctor depended entirely on his willingness to open doors for me. I believed him because everyone else in my family believed him, or at least they acted like they did. But lying in that hospital bed, listening to Dr. Henley's calm, professional voice as she documented the truth, I started to remember things differently. I started to remember the scholarship letters that came directly to me with no mention of Uncle Raymond's influence. I started to remember the pre-med advisor who told me I had the strongest application she'd seen in years. I started to remember the professor who recommended me for advanced research opportunities based solely on my academic performance. Maybe I wasn't as dependent on Uncle Raymond as he wanted me to believe. But my family wasn't ready to hear that realization. 3 weeks after the assault, Uncle Raymond himself finally came to visit. He brought flowers, expensive ones from Westfield's most exclusive florist, and wore his most concerned uncle expression. "Elena, sweetheart," he said, settling into the chair next to my bed like he owned it, "I've been so worried about you. How are you feeling?" My parents hovered in the doorway, watching our interaction like theater critics evaluating a performance. I could feel the weight of their expectations, their desperate hope that this visit would magically fix everything and restore the family harmony they valued more than my safety. "I'm managing," I said carefully. Uncle Raymond nodded sympathetically. "Head injuries are serious business. I've been consulting with some colleagues, the best neurologist in the state, about your recovery. We want to make sure you get the absolute best care." The implied threat was subtle but clear. He controlled access to the best medical care, just like he controlled everything else in our family's life. "Dr. Henley is an excellent neurologist. I'm satisfied with her care." Uncle Raymond's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dr. Henley is adequate, but I'm talking about specialists at Metropolitan Children's, maybe even consulting with experts at the state university, people who understand the long-term implications of traumatic brain injury." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "Elena, I need you to understand something. What happened in the kitchen? I was under tremendous stress. The hospital board has been breathing down my neck about some ridiculous complaints from nursing staff. My divorce proceedings with your Aunt Linda are getting ugly. I wasn't myself that day." He paused, waiting for me to respond with understanding and forgiveness. When I didn't, he continued,
But regardless of my state of mind, I never should have lost my temper with you. I'm genuinely sorry for that, and I want to make it right." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I've been thinking about your medical school applications. With your injury, you might need to take a gap year, which could actually work in your favor. I've spoken to the dean at Metropolitan Medical College, he's a personal friend, and he's agreed to hold a spot for you in next year's incoming class. Full scholarship, guaranteed residency placement in whatever specialty you choose." My mother gasped. Carlos stepped into the room, his eyes wide with excitement. My father actually smiled for the first time since the assault. "Raymond," my mother breathed, That's incredible. Elena, do you understand what this means? Metropolitan Medical College has a 98% board pass rate. Their graduates get residencies at the most prestigious hospitals in the country." Raymond nodded, his expression magnanimous. "All you have to do is accept the offer, put this unfortunate incident behind us, focus on your recovery, and step into the future I've arranged for you." The silence stretched between us as everyone waited for my response. This was the moment they all expected me to break, to choose the path of least resistance, to accept Uncle Raymond's generosity and pretend his assault never happened. But something had changed in me during those weeks of recovery. Maybe it was the constant headaches reminding me of what he'd done. Maybe it was Dr. Henley's voice in my head, calm and professional, documenting the truth without flinching. Maybe it was just the clarity that comes from almost dying. Or maybe it was the memory that had surfaced just the night before, a memory I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it never happened.
I was 16, working late on a research paper in Uncle Raymond's home office while he was supposedly at the hospital. He'd given me access to his medical journals for my project, and I was grateful for the opportunity to use such prestigious resources. I was alone in the house. Aunt Linda was visiting her sister in Burlington, and their kids were at friends' houses. I heard Uncle Raymond's car in the driveway around 9 p.m., earlier than expected. I called out to let him know I was there, but he didn't respond. I heard him moving around downstairs, then his footsteps on the stairs. When he appeared in the doorway of his office, something was wrong. His clothes were disheveled, his hair messed up, and there was a strange look in his eyes, predatory and unfocused. "Elena," he'd said, his voice slurred slightly. "What are you doing here so late?" "Working on my research paper," I had replied, suddenly very aware that I was alone in the house with him. "You said I could use your journals." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Of course. You're such a dedicated student, so mature for your age." He'd moved closer to the desk where I was sitting, close enough that I could smell alcohol on his breath, mixed with something else, something clinical and sharp, like the antiseptic smell that clung to his clothes after surgery. "You know, Elena," he said, reaching out to touch my hair, "you're growing into such a beautiful young woman, so intelligent, so promising." His hand had lingered on my hair, then moved to my shoulder, then started to drift lower. I'd frozen, my 16-year-old brain struggling to process what was happening, what he was doing, whether this was normal uncle behavior or something else entirely. That's when we had heard Aunt Linda's car in the driveway. Uncle Raymond had jerked his hand away like I was on fire, his face cycling through confusion, panic, and finally settling on cold calculation. "You should pack up your things," he said, his voice returning to normal. "It's getting late." I'd stuffed my papers and books into my backpack with shaking hands and practically ran out of the house, mumbling some excuse to Aunt Linda about finishing my work at home. I never told anyone what happened that night. I convinced myself that I'd misunderstood, that my teenage paranoia had made me imagine inappropriate intentions where none existed. Uncle Raymond continued to be helpful and supportive, never crossing any obvious lines, and I buried the memory so deep I almost forgot it happened. But it did happen.
And sitting in my childhood bedroom, looking at Uncle Raymond's generous offer to control my entire future, I finally understood what that night was really about. It was about power. It was about control. It was about a man who believed that his financial support gave him ownership over the people he helped. And the assault in the kitchen wasn't an isolated incident of lost temper. It was the inevitable escalation of a pattern that had been building for years. "Elena," my mother prompted gently, "what do you think about Uncle Raymond's offer?" I looked around the room at my family's expectant faces, all of them desperate for me to take the deal and make this problem disappear. I thought about Dr. Henley's business card, hidden in my jewelry box upstairs. I thought about the medical records that documented the truth, no matter how much my family wanted to rewrite it. And I thought about the girl I used to be, grateful, compliant, willing to accept scraps of affection and call them love. "I need some time to think about it," I said finally. Uncle Raymond's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, this is a big decision, but don't take too long. The dean will need an answer soon." After he left, my family peppered me with questions about what there was to think about, how I could possibly hesitate when offered such an incredible opportunity. But I wasn't thinking about the offer. I was thinking about Dr. Henley's promise that medical records were permanent, legal documents that couldn't be changed or suppressed. And I was thinking about making a phone call. Because if Uncle Raymond thought he could buy my silence with a medical school acceptance, he was about to learn that some things aren't for sale, especially not the truth. Dr. Henley answered on the second ring, her voice as crisp and professional as I remembered from the hospital. "Elena, how are you feeling? Any changes in your symptoms since discharge?" "The headaches are manageable, but I didn't call about my medical condition. I need to ask you something about what you said in the hospital." There was a pause, then her voice shifted to something more cautious. "What specifically did you want to discuss?" "You said the medical records were permanent, that they couldn't be changed or suppressed. I need to know how permanent and who has access to them." Another pause, longer this time. When Dr. Henley spoke again, her tone was carefully measured. "Elena, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I'm about to tell you is extremely important, and I need you to understand that I'm sharing this information because I believe you have a right to know. Can you talk freely where you are?" I pressed my ear harder against the phone. "Yes, I'm alone in my room. Your uncle, Dr. Raymond Vasquez, is currently under investigation by the State Medical Board. Has been for the past 8 months. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the phone tighter, my hand suddenly shaking. "What kind of investigation?"
Multiple complaints. Inappropriate conduct with female residents, abuse of authority, creating hostile work environments. There have been 3 formal complaints filed in the past 2 years, but the board has been having difficulty building a case because the complainants have been reluctant to proceed. My mouth went dry. Reluctant how? 2 of the residents who filed complaints suddenly withdrew them after meeting with Dr. Vasquez privately. The third complainant, a nurse named Jennifer Walsh, was transferred to another department after her complaint and subsequently left Metropolitan Children's Hospital entirely. Her complaint is still active, but without corroborating evidence or witness testimony, the board's hands are tied. I closed my eyes, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. That's why he mentioned complaints from nursing staff when he came to see me. He's trying to manage this investigation. "Elena," Dr. Henley said carefully, "I want you to understand something. The medical documentation I created of your injuries, it's not just a record of what happened to you. In the context of an ongoing investigation into Dr. Vasquez's conduct, your medical records become evidence of a pattern of escalating behavior." What does that mean, exactly? It means that your assault,
documented by an independent physician with detailed injury patterns and witness statements about your family's attempts to cover it up, could be the corroborating evidence the medical board needs to proceed with formal disciplinary action. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she was telling me. All of this time, I'd thought I was alone in dealing with Uncle Raymond's abuse, but there were others. Other women who had tried to speak up and been silenced, intimidated, or pushed out. "Dr. Henley," I said slowly, if I decided to share my medical records with the medical board, how would that work? First, you'd need to file a formal complaint with the state medical board. They have a specific process for reporting physician misconduct. Second, you'd need to authorize the release of your medical records to the board investigators. And third, she paused, you'd need to be prepared for what comes next. What comes next? Elena, your uncle is a powerful man with significant influence in this state's medical community. If you file a complaint against him, he will use every resource at his disposal to discredit you, intimidate you, and protect his reputation. Are you prepared for that kind of fight? I thought about Uncle Raymond's offer earlier that day, the medical school acceptance, the guaranteed residency, the financial security. All of it contingent on my silence, all of it designed to make me complicit in my own victimization. Dr. Henley, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you helping me? You barely know me, and going against my uncle could cause problems for you professionally. There was a long pause before she answered. Elena, 15 years ago, when I was a resident at Metropolitan Children's, Dr. Raymond Vasquez was my attending physician for a 6-month rotation in pediatric emergency medicine. My stomach dropped. He made my life hell for 6 months. Nothing as overtly violent as what he did to you, but a constant campaign of psychological intimidation, inappropriate comments, and professional sabotage. When I tried to report his behavior, I was told that Dr. Vasquez was a respected colleague and that perhaps I was misinterpreting his mentoring style. What happened? I kept my head down, finished my rotation, and moved to a different hospital system. I told myself that was the smart thing to do, the practical thing to do. I built my career elsewhere and tried to forget about those 6 months. Her voice took on a harder edge. But forgetting and moving on doesn't stop men like your uncle, Elena. It just gives them permission to keep hurting people. When I saw you in that hospital bed, saw your family trying to gaslight you into protecting him, I realized I had a choice. I could do what I did 15 years ago, document the minimum required and walk away, or I could do what I should have done back then. Which is, tell the truth, document everything, and make sure that this time there are consequences. I felt something shift inside me, a recognition that this was bigger than just my family dynamics, bigger than Uncle Raymond's control over our lives. This was about a pattern of abuse that had been going on for years, with multiple victims who had been silenced or intimidated into compliance. Dr. Henley, if I file this complaint, what are the chances it will actually result in meaningful consequences for him? With Jennifer Walsh's complaint already on file, and with your medical documentation providing evidence of escalating violent behavior, honestly, Elena, I think you could bring him down. But it won't be easy, and it won't be quick. How long are we talking about? Medical board investigations can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on the complexity of the case and the cooperation of witnesses. And Elena, there's something else you need to know. What? If you file this complaint, other victims may come forward. Women who have been afraid to speak up might find the courage to tell their stories if they see that someone else was willing to take the first step. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. It wasn't just about getting justice for myself anymore. It was about creating space for other victims to find their voices. I need to think about this, I said finally. Of course. But Elena, whatever you decide quickly. The medical board investigation is ongoing, and your testimony could be crucial. The longer you wait, the more opportunity your uncle has to manage the situation.
After hanging up, I sat on my bedroom floor for a long time, staring at the business card Dr. Henley had given me in the hospital. On one side was her contact information. On the other side, I'd written the State Medical Board's complaint hotline number. 2 phone numbers. 2 possible futures. I could call Uncle Raymond, accept his generous offer, and slide seamlessly into the life he'd planned for me. Medical school, residency, a prestigious career built on his connections and influence. All I had to do was pretend he'd never assaulted me, never made me feel unsafe, never used his power to hurt other women. Or I could call the medical board and tell them everything. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. If I was going to take on Uncle Raymond, I needed to know everything about his vulnerabilities, his allies, and his methods of retaliation. I opened my laptop and started researching. The State Medical Board's website had a search function for licensed physicians. I typed in Raymond Vasquez and pulled up his profile. Licensed for 31 years, board-certified in pediatric surgery, affiliated with Metropolitan Children's Hospital, numerous professional awards and recognitions. But buried in the small print at the bottom of his profile was a single line: disciplinary actions, investigation pending. So Dr. Henley was telling the truth. Uncle Raymond was already under investigation, which meant my complaint wouldn't come out of nowhere. It would be additional evidence in an existing case. I spent the next 3 hours researching everything I could find about medical board investigations, disciplinary procedures, and the rights of complainants. What I learned was both encouraging and terrifying. Encouraging because the medical board took accusations of physician misconduct seriously, especially when there was documented evidence of patient harm. Terrifying because Uncle Raymond would be notified of any complaint filed against him, and he would have the right to respond and defend himself, which meant that the moment I filed the complaint, he would know exactly what I was doing. I also researched Dr. Patricia Henley, 15 years of experience in neurology, excellent reputation, published researcher, no disciplinary actions on her record. If Uncle Raymond tried to discredit her testimony, he would have a difficult time finding anything to attack. Finally, I looked up Jennifer Walsh, the nurse whose complaint was still active. It took some digging through social media and professional networking sites, but I found her. She was now working at Riverside General Hospital, the same hospital where I'd been volunteering. On impulse, I sent her a message through the hospital's internal directory. Ms. Walsh, my name is Elena Vasquez. I believe we may have had similar experiences with Dr. Raymond Vasquez. I would like to speak with you if you're willing. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Jennifer Walsh. Elena, she said without preamble, are you Raymond Vasquez's niece? Yes. And you're reaching out to me because... I took a deep breath. Because he assaulted me 3 weeks ago, gave me a traumatic brain injury, and I just found out from my neurologist that you filed a complaint with the medical board. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she spoke. Can you meet me tomorrow? Somewhere private, away from the hospital? Yes. Riverside Park, by the duck pond, 2 p.m., come alone, and Elena? Yes? Bring copies of your medical records, all of them. The next afternoon, I found Jennifer Walsh sitting on a bench overlooking the duck pond in Riverside Park. She was in her early 30s, with short blonde hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she didn't tolerate nonsense. Elena, she said as I approached. Ms. Walsh? Call me Jen. Sit down. I sat beside her on the bench, my medical records in a manila folder on my lap. Before we start, Jen said, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you could put both of us at risk. Raymond Vasquez is not just a respected surgeon, he's connected to some of the most powerful people in this state's medical and political establishment. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right, and we're going to be prepared for war. I understand. She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. Show me your medical records. I handed her the folder.
She read through Dr. Henley's documentation carefully, occasionally asking questions about specific details. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked out at the water. "Your doctor did excellent work," she said finally. "This is exactly the kind of documentation the medical board needs to see. Detailed, professional, corroborated by physical evidence." "Jen, can I ask what happened to you?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to face me. "I was the charge nurse in the pediatric ICU. Dr. Vasquez was one of the attending surgeons who regularly had patients in our unit. For about 6 months, he singled me out for what he called special attention. Started with inappropriate comments about my appearance, my uniform, my body. Escalated to cornering me in supply closets, touching me when other staff weren't around, making sexual propositions. Did you report it? I tried. I went to my supervisor, who told me to document everything and keep detailed records, so I did. Dates, times, witnesses, when there were any. Exact quotes of what he said to me. What happened? I filed a formal complaint with HR. 2 days later, I was called into a meeting with the hospital's chief administrator, the head of HR, and a lawyer. They told me that Dr. Vasquez had concerns about my professional competency and was recommending that I be transferred to a different unit for additional training. My stomach turned. They retaliated against you for filing the complaint. Exactly. But here's the thing, Elena. I kept copies of everything, every document, every email, every piece of evidence I'd collected. When they transferred me, I took it all with me. Is that when you filed the complaint with the medical board?
"Elena," he said finally, his voice shifting back to that patronizing uncle tone, "I think you're scared and confused and lashing out at people who love you, but this complaint you filed, it's based on a misunderstanding. If you withdraw it, we can all move forward. I can arrange for you to see the best psychiatrists in the state, people who specialize in trauma recovery. The only trauma I need to recover from is the assault you committed against me." "Elena, Uncle Raymond," I interrupted, "let me be very clear about something. I have medical documentation from an independent neurologist proving that you assaulted me. I have witness testimony about your family's attempts to cover up that assault. I have evidence of your long-term pattern of harassment and abuse toward female colleagues. And now I have a recorded phone conversation where you threatened economic retaliation against my family members." I paused, letting that sink in. The medical board investigation is moving forward whether you like it or not. The only question is whether you want to make it worse for yourself by continuing to threaten and intimidate witnesses. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear Uncle Raymond breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was pure venom. "You have no idea what you've started, Elena. No idea at all." The line went dead. My family stared at me in stunned silence. I realized that in the space of one phone conversation, I had completely destroyed their perception of me as the quiet, grateful niece who could be managed and controlled. "Elena," my mother whispered, "was that really smart, provoking him like that?" "Mom, he assaulted me. He threatened our family. How exactly was I supposed to respond?" Carlos was pacing the kitchen now. "This is insane. This is completely insane. Elena, do you understand what you've done? Uncle Raymond has connections everywhere. He could destroy all of us." "Carlos," I said quietly, "Uncle Raymond is about to lose his medical license. He's about to face criminal charges for assault. His career is over. Whatever connections he has now, he won't have them much longer." My father hadn't spoken since the phone call ended. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. "Dad?" I said gently. He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. "Elena," he said slowly, "I need you to understand something. Our whole lives, everything we've built, it's all connected to Raymond. The house, the business, Carlos's education, your opportunities. If he goes down, we could lose everything. Then maybe it's time we learn to stand on our own. You don't understand. my mother said, tears streaming down her face. We owe him so much money. The house, the business loans, Carlos's school. If Raymond wants to call in those debts, he can't, I said firmly. Most of those financial arrangements are formal contracts with specific terms. Uncle Raymond can't just arbitrarily change them because he's angry. But his connections, Carlos said, the contracts Dad has with hospital systems, the business relationships, he could poison all of that. Then we'll build new relationships. Dad, you're a skilled contractor with 30 years of experience. Carlos, you're smart and hardworking. We don't need Uncle Raymond's approval to succeed. My family looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. They'd been dependent on Uncle Raymond's influence for so long that they couldn't imagine life without it. But I could. For the first time in my life, I could see a future where we weren't beholden to his approval, where our accomplishments were our own, where we didn't have to worry about staying in his good graces to maintain our standard of living. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Elena, my father said finally, what happens now? Now we wait for the medical board to complete their investigation. We answer any questions they have honestly, and we deal with whatever consequences come from finally telling the truth. And if Raymond tries to retaliate, then we document it and report it to the authorities. Dad, he's not untouchable. He's just a man who's used his position and influence to avoid consequences for his behavior. But that's over now. My mother was still crying. I can't believe this is happening. All these years, and we never knew. You knew. Maybe not the full extent, but you knew something was wrong. You just chose to look the other way because it was easier than confronting it. The truth of that statement hung in the air like smoke. My family had enabled Uncle Raymond's behavior for years, not because they were evil, but because challenging him felt too risky, too expensive, too complicated. But enabling abuse always costs more in the long run than confronting it. What do we do now? Carlos asked. Now we learn to live without his influence. We learn to make our own way, and we support each other through whatever comes next.
It wasn't the answer they wanted. They wanted me to fix this, to find a way to undo the complaint and restore the status quo. But the status quo had never been sustainable. It had been built on lies, control, and the systematic silencing of Uncle Raymond's victims. That world was ending, and while the new world would be more uncertain, it would also be more honest. 3 days later, I received a call from Carol Martinez at the medical board. Elena, she said, I wanted to update you on the investigation. Dr. Vasquez has retained legal counsel, which is his right, but here's what's interesting. His lawyer called our office yesterday to inquire about the possibility of a plea arrangement. What does that mean? It means they're taking your complaint very seriously. Defense attorneys don't ask about plea deals unless they think their client is in significant legal trouble. I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with relief. Uncle Raymond was scared. For the first time in his life, he was facing consequences he couldn't control or manipulate his way out of. What happens next? The investigation continues. We'll interview witnesses, review all the documentation, and compile a comprehensive report. If the evidence supports disciplinary action, Dr. Vasquez will face a formal hearing before the medical board. How long will that take? Another 2 to 3 months, most likely. Elena, I want you to know that your complaint has been instrumental in moving this case forward. The other complainants have been much more cooperative since learning that someone was willing to take the first step. After hanging up, I sat in my room thinking about that phrase, taking the first step. For most of my life, I'd been taught that taking steps meant following the path Uncle Raymond laid out for me. But the first step I'd actually taken for myself had been the one that led me away from his control. It was the first step toward a future where I didn't owe my achievements to anyone's generosity, where my worth wasn't contingent on someone else's approval, where telling the truth was more important than keeping the peace. Uncle Raymond had spent years building a system of control based on gratitude, dependency, and fear. But he'd made one crucial mistake.
He'd assumed I'd always be grateful for scraps when I deserved the whole meal. He was about to learn just how expensive that assumption would be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.
Is that when you filed the complaint with the medical board? Yes, and that's when things got really interesting. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. The medical board investigator contacted me 3 months ago. Turns out, my complaint wasn't the first one they'd received about your uncle. Dr. Henley mentioned there were others. 3 others, actually, 2 residents and another nurse. But Elena, here's what your Dr. Henley might not know. The medical board investigation has been stalled for months because they haven't been able to establish a pattern of escalating behavior. What do you mean? All of the previous complaints involved harassment, inappropriate comments, abuse of authority, serious violations, but not criminal behavior. Your assault, documented by an independent physician with clear evidence of intentional violence, that changes everything. She opened her folder and showed me a letter from the state medical board. This came last week. The board is requesting additional information about Dr. Vasquez's recent activities and asking if I'm aware of any incidents involving physical violence or patient harm. I stared at the letter. They're looking for exactly what happened to me. Elena, your complaint won't just be additional evidence. It will be the centerpiece that ties everything together. The medical board has been building a case against your uncle for months, but they needed proof that his behavior was escalating to physical violence. So if you file the complaint with Dr. Henley's medical documentation and my records of his pattern of harassment, we can destroy him. The word destroy hung in the air between us. That's what this was really about. Not just stopping Uncle Raymond's abuse, but ending his career, his reputation, his ability to hurt anyone else. Jen, I have to ask, are you sure you want to do this? You've already been through so much. She smiled, but there was no humor in it. Elena, for the past year, I've watched your uncle continue to work, continue to have access to vulnerable patients and staff, continue to use his position to intimidate and abuse people. Every day I don't act is another day he has the opportunity to hurt someone else. She closed her folder and looked at me directly. The question isn't whether I'm ready to do this. The question is whether you are. Because once we file your complaint, there's no going back. Your uncle will know you're the one who brought him down, and he will never forgive you for it. I thought about my family, waiting at home for me to accept Uncle Raymond's generous offer and make this whole problem disappear. I thought about the medical school acceptance, the guaranteed residency, the financial security. Then I thought about 16-year-old me frozen in Uncle Raymond's office while his hands moved where they shouldn't. I thought about the residents who had been too afraid to proceed with their complaints. I thought about Jennifer Walsh, forced out of her job for trying to tell the truth. I'm ready, I said. Jennifer smiled, and this time it was genuine. Then let's bring the bastard down. I filed the formal complaint with the state medical board on a Tuesday morning at exactly 9 a.m., standing in the marble lobby of the Westfield Government Complex with Jennifer Walsh beside me and Dr. Henley on speakerphone as a witness. The complaint was 12 pages long, meticulously documented, and supported by medical records, witness statements, and Jennifer's extensive files on Uncle Raymond's pattern of harassment. The medical board investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Carol Martinez, accepted our documentation with the kind of professional gravity that told me this wasn't just another routine complaint. She explained that Dr. Vasquez would be notified within 48 hours, that he would have the right to respond, and that the investigation would likely take several months to complete. Ms. Vasquez, she said, looking directly at me,
I want you to understand that filing this complaint may result in significant personal and professional retaliation. Dr. Vasquez will know that you initiated this action, and he will likely use every resource at his disposal to discredit your testimony. I understand, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Good, because in my experience, men in Dr. Vasquez's position don't go down quietly. She was right. Uncle Raymond's response came faster than anyone expected. I was at home Wednesday evening, helping my mother prepare dinner, when my father's phone rang. He answered it in the living room, but his voice carried clearly to the kitchen. Raymond, what do you mean investigated? What complaint? My mother's hands stilled on the vegetable she was chopping. I continued stirring the sauce, my heart pounding, but my expression carefully neutral. Are you sure? Who would... Elena? My father's voice rose sharply. Elena filed a complaint against you? That's when my mother dropped the knife. Within minutes, my father was in the kitchen, his face flushed with anger and panic. Elena, what the hell have you done? I turned off the stove and faced him calmly. I filed a complaint with the state medical board about Uncle Raymond's assault on me. Assault? My mother gasped. Elena, he lost his temper. That's not... He fractured my skull, Mom. He gave me a traumatic brain injury. That's assault. My father moved closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do you have any idea what you've done? Raymond called the house in a panic. The medical board contacted him today. They're launching a formal investigation. Good, I said, simply. The word hung in the air like a bomb. Good? My father repeated, his voice incredulous. Elena, this will destroy everything. Raymond's career, our family's reputation, your future. He said the medical school offer is off the table now, completely off the table. I nodded. I figured it would be. My mother started crying. Elena, please, there has to be a way to fix this. Can't you call them back? Tell them you made a mistake? I didn't make a mistake, Mom. That's when Carlos appeared in the doorway, having clearly heard the commotion from upstairs. Elena, are you out of your fucking mind? Uncle Raymond just called me. He's talking about lawsuits, about having you declared mentally incompetent due to your head injury. He thinks you're having some kind of psychotic break. I almost laughed at the predictability of it. Of course, Uncle Raymond would try to use my brain injury against me, to suggest that trauma had made me delusional or unreliable. Carlos, I said, calmly, Uncle Raymond is under investigation by the state medical board, has been for 8 months. There are multiple complaints against him for harassment and abuse. My complaint isn't coming out of nowhere, it's additional evidence in an ongoing case.
The kitchen went dead silent. What are you talking about? My father demanded. Uncle Raymond has been sexually harassing female staff at Metropolitan Children's for years. At least 4 other women have filed complaints. The medical board has been building a case against him since last spring. My mother sank into a chair, her face pale. That's impossible. Someone would have told us. Raymond would have said something. Why would he tell you that he's being investigated for sexual harassment? I asked. Did you really think he'd advertise that information to his family? Carlos was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Even if that's true, Elena, why would you get involved? Why would you make our family part of this mess? Because he made me part of this mess when he assaulted me in this kitchen. But filing a complaint? My father said, his voice breaking slightly. Elena, there were other ways to handle this. We could have dealt with it privately, as a family. The way you dealt with it privately when I was 16 and he cornered me in his office? Another bomb. Another silence. My mother's head snapped up. What? When I was 16, working on a research paper in Uncle Raymond's office, he came home drunk and tried to touch me. Inappropriately. The only reason it didn't go further was because Aunt Linda came home unexpectedly. Elena, my mother whispered, why didn't you tell us?
Because I was 16 and confused, and I convinced myself I'd imagined it. And because every time I tried to express discomfort about Uncle Raymond's behavior over the years, you all told me I was being ungrateful and dramatic. My father was shaking his head slowly. This is crazy. Raymond has never... He wouldn't... Dad, I said quietly, he fractured my skull. You saw the medical reports. You were there when Dr. Henley explained that the injury patterns were consistent with intentional trauma, not a fall. How much more evidence do you need? But filing a complaint with the medical board? Carlos said. Elena, do you understand what this means? Uncle Raymond could lose his license. His whole career could be over. Yes, I said. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my family processing this new version of me. Not the grateful niece who accepted Uncle Raymond's generosity without question, but someone who was willing to destroy his career to protect herself and others. My father's phone rang again. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went even paler. It's Raymond. Answer it, I replied. Put it on speaker. Elena, I don't think... Put it on speaker, Dad. Let's all hear what Uncle Raymond has to say. My father reluctantly pressed the speaker button. Diego? Uncle Raymond's voice filled the kitchen, tight with barely controlled rage. Is Elena there? I'm here, Uncle Raymond, I said before my father could respond. Elena. His voice shifted, taking on that familiar tone of patronizing authority. I think we need to have a serious conversation about this complaint you filed. You're clearly not thinking rationally. I'm thinking very rationally, more rationally than I have in years. Elena, you've suffered a traumatic brain injury. Head trauma can cause confusion, false memories, paranoid thinking. I think you need to see a psychiatrist. Are you going to claim that I imagined the skull fracture? That Dr. Henley fabricated the medical records? Of course not, but the cause of that injury. Was you grabbing my hair and slamming my head into the granite countertop because I told you I didn't want your help anymore? I heard him take a sharp breath. Elena, that's simply not what happened. You fell, and now you're creating this elaborate fantasy? Uncle Raymond, I said, my voice steady and calm. Are you familiar with a nurse named Jennifer Walsh? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Jennifer Walsh, who filed a complaint against you last year for sexual harassment. Are you going to claim she imagined that too? When Uncle Raymond spoke again, his voice was different, colder, more calculating. Elena, I don't know what lies people have been filling your head with, but you're making a serious mistake. This complaint you filed, it's going to have consequences you haven't considered. What kind of consequences? Well, for starters, the medical school offer is obviously withdrawn, but beyond that, Elena, you need to understand that accusations like this, they don't just affect me, they affect everyone associated with me. Your father's construction company has several contracts with hospital systems I work with. Your brother's business degree, the loans I co-signed. These relationships can become very complicated very quickly. The threat was crystal clear. He was going to use his financial entanglements with my family to pressure me into withdrawing the complaint. My mother looked panicked. Elena, what is he talking about? What loans? I co-signed Carlos's student loans, and I have significant business relationships that could impact your father's construction contracts. I'd hate to see the family suffer financially because of Elena's confusion. Are you threatening my family? I'm simply explaining the reality of our interconnected business relationships, Elena. When someone makes false accusations against a respected physician, there can be ripple effects. Carlos looked sick. Elena, I still have 2 years left on those loans. If Uncle Raymond calls them in, he can't call them in, I said, looking directly at the phone. Student loans don't work that way, Uncle Raymond. Even as a cosigner, you can't demand immediate payment without cause. He paused, surprised that I knew enough to call his bluff. Furthermore, I continued, what you just did, threatening economic retaliation against family members to pressure me into withdrawing a complaint, that's witness intimidation. It's also a criminal offense. Elena, he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, you're playing with forces you don't understand. I have connections throughout this state's medical and legal community. I can make your life very difficult. Uncle Raymond, I said calmly, this conversation is being recorded. It wasn't, actually, but I wanted to see how he'd respond to the possibility. You can't record phone conversations without consent, he snapped. Actually, I can. This is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm a participant in without informing the other parties.